going to start, and maybe more people will be coming, but it is at 4:15 on the last day of the Olam gathering, so we may be a more intimate group. So welcome. I'm David J. Cooper. I need to remind that since several people have asked me more about my meditation books, which I have not written. I'm now the Emeritus Rabbi at Kehillah Community Synagogue. That was founded by Bert Jacobson 34 years ago, and I worked with him to put that together. Now, last year, Bert and I did a workshop on Kehillah here at Olam as the first, and we did so because we were the first Jewish renewal entity that was specifically organized as a synagogue. And also, it was the first organized expressly as a politically progressive, or if you will, radical congregation. So Rabbi Eva Sachs-Boulder, one of this year's conference organizers, attended our session and took notice of how Kehillah's political action and advocacy is also reflected in some degree in how we operate as a community. Essentially, as I put it, we seek through our social action the establishment of a social-wide beloved community. So while we're advocating, we seek to be ourselves a beloved community, maybe perhaps 1/60th of social action, the beloved community we'd like to see in the future. So as Gandhi put it, we try to be the change we seek. So that is the name of this session. I often hear the expression that before we can change the world, we have to change ourselves. And I could not disagree more. The world cannot wait for us to get our shit together. The world will be changed by people who are flawed. All of us. So transforming ourselves will have to be coterminous in time with our work to transform and heal the world. So Gandhi's expression to be the change we seek, I interpret to mean that we must seek to change the world based on our values, and that the same values must be applied to how we live our lives personally and especially in community. The four of us here are social activists, and we are rabbis with all that implies. The panelists were selected because of our activities and because describing their activities in particular sheds light on how we can be the change in a variety of ways. Many others could equally have been selected, so this is somewhat arbitrary as well. This panel is not a theoretically oriented one. This is the world of Asiyah, on which you may build for your considerations issues about sensitivity, theory, and spirit, Yitzirah, Binah, and Atzilut on top of that. But we will be mostly in the world of Tachlis. So, introducing the panelists. Rabbi Andrea Cohn-Kiner is someone to whom we have many of us have turned in regard to community, as she has made available to us the work Conscious Community, a translation of the writing of columnist Kalman Shapira. She serves as rabbi in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and has been active and I don't know what I write here, in the fields of conflict resolution, prayer leadership, Musar, and Chassidut. She was leader in the work of compassionate listening. As an environmental activist, she was founding director of the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network. And then, to the far side over there, on the far right,
It's my left. All right.
Oh yeah, there you go. From one direction or another, you'll get it. Stephen Booth Nadav is the director of the Wisdom House in Denver, a center for multi-faith dialogue and spiritual inquiry. He serves on the Religious Advisory Council of the University of Denver. On a personal note, 20 years ago, Stephen turned down the offer to be Kehila's senior rabbi. And as a result, he has had a profound but unintended effect on my life. Stephen is here today in his capacity as chaplain and also, I think, as a partial organizer of the Kabod Senior Life in Denver, about which he's going to speak about more in his presentation. Now, Rain Zohab, among many other activities, serves as the chair of Ohalah's Tikkun Olam committee, and for that she really deserves a twinkle.
Really?
And she is the rabbi and spiritual advisor at the Interfaith Families program in Greater Washington, D.C., where she has been active in revitalizing its Tikkun Olam work. She teaches the online course, Social Action Education as a Spiritual Practice. What brings her to the panel today is her participation in the actions at Standing Rock in support of the water protectors, that is, the Indian tribes seeking to stop the XL pipeline in North Dakota. So before each speaker, we have a brief refrain from a song by Linda Hirshhorn that is exactly on point. So if Abby and Rosalind could just start us off.
The words are, won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world?
Amen.
And we'll do that in between each of our speakers.
So I was asked to address environmental issues from an interfaith context. And I'll just start by saying that I got into that work after becoming active in Israel-Palestine work, which made it impossible for me to work in the Jewish community of Hartford. And so I sat in discernment and thought, maybe I'll go into interfaith work. And that worked out pretty well. They're both really close to my heart. So there's an organization in Connecticut, an Interreligious Eco-Justice Network, also known now as Connecticut Interfaith Power and Light. So the DNA of that group is national and it's diverse. And when faith communities organize around the earth, we all have what to say about it. I mean, this is how I got my first evangelical friends. This is how I got my first Black organizing partners. It is truly all of us share this, so there was a way to respect the diversity of each group and the different language and approach of each group. We didn't have to mush, and we could all speak from our own truth and perspective around activity on earth care. So it was pretty well guided from the beginning. We felt organizing around Interreligious Eco-Justice Network that we were going to work kind of in the four worlds, I mean, without saying it that way, but we were going to do practical action, including advocacy. We were going to address the spiritual nature of the work because we don't have time to deal with the end pipe. We have to kind of stop it upstream. And so to stop it upstream is to move the heart and to move the consciousness. So we felt we had to address what we are losing as human beings when we feel a disconnection from the earth in such a way that we can harm it and waste it the way we do. We have to reclaim the pain. We have to sense the disconnection, because that change of heart is the thing that can move us to reorient to overcome the numbness and the shock and the despair and the pain. But starting with the numbness, breaking through the numbness. And so we, from the start, knew that we had to frame this theologically and in the deepest and highest possible way. And of course, we offered education, including sermons and practical workshops in whatever advocacy areas that we took on. Our first advocacy area was around energy, and we worked in energy. We worked in both conservation and support for renewable energy. Actually, we got funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, which I had to kind of just take a deep breath and do that and just kind of keep it in the back of my head. Why are they in this business? So I'll leave that there, but okay, expiation maybe. Ich weiß nicht, but that's where they were starting. They were starting on renewable. So they considered us market drivers. They wanted us to get out and talk to people in the pews because that's normative, that's not hippies, that's people that vote, that's people that know their senators, that's people that have some sorts of resources, including social agency and so forth. So they saw us as sort of a cutting edge marketing ally. That's how they talk. So, we took it out to partner with them. And additional funding was made available, and we matched our programming to take on eventually toxic chemicals. All, again, addressing all four areas: advocacy, education, spiritual framing, and practical action. So for example, we had workshops in like making your own cosmetics, which we did in a lot of Black congregations and with young people and so forth. We found some good allies around that. And then in the end, I was very motivated to add food as a ministry. And so they said I could do it if I could find money for it, and I did add food. So I'm going to tell you one example of one thing that we did that generates some principles for organizing that are relevant to this conversation of being the change. And that is, I know a lot more about renewable energy credits and ISO New England and how the power grid works than not in this room, maybe not in this room, but I know a lot more about that stuff than most rabbis. But maybe that isn't true in this room, but the truth is, what does that really mean? It means I had to work with, besides the Catholics and the Lutherans and stuff like that, entrepreneurs, solar co-ops, legislators, policy, utility guys, yeah? And we developed a very fantastic program called This Old House of Worship, because we were working with all these different people, and our program eventually became a vetted program of the utility company. They paid us to teach a program and we did it like this. It was a conservation-oriented program, and what we required from the communities was each congregation had to get a team of 5 or more. Why 5? Pirkei Avot 2:6. The Shechina works with people that are Aguda al haaretz but Aguda is like also fist and palm. If there's 5 people, if there's 5 people, you can make a change in a congregation. If I would go into a congregation and say, who's interested in the environment here? And they would say, oh, that's Louise's thing. Louise is not successful. Louise is bitter. People are sick of hearing from Louise. And so I said, Louise, here's your first job. Find 4 people. So we made people make teams, and then we would get 5 congregations, typically on a green, on the green in the town, or 5 congregations in a region, and we would have this 6-part class that would go from one building to the next. So the time we were studying the envelope and the windows and the leakiness, the heat loss in the building, we were in that synagogue or temple, and that was measured there. Next we went here and looked at the heating system. We went there and looked at other aspects of the building's functioning. So in the course of doing that together, we taught congregants how to measure the heat loss and figure out the return on investment for different improvements they could do in their own buildings, and again with utility funds. So that was pretty exciting. I think that's still available, and I think it's gone into other states as well. I'm not there anymore. I want to share with you the principle of 5 and the diversities. And I want to share one or two other kind of overarching perspectives that I developed from doing this work. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but to put it briefly, I'm not in a philanthropy model with any of the work that I do in social justice. I'm not there to help the Palestinians or help the Black congregation. I am there because there's work that I want to do in the world and I need to do it with these people. Because if I'm there to help them and it gets hard or it doesn't happen fast, I can go home. But if I'm there because it's my planet and our work, there's no going home. We have to stay involved and we have to do it together. And I just think that's really good language to sort of alert to people, you know, Jews, people off-white. We're off-white, you know what I mean? And so I think one of the ways we kind of protect ourselves from that vulnerability is to help others. Why would anyone hate us? We're helping others. So we kind of hide from that shadowiness by helping so much, and it doesn't really own our own vulnerability, and we're kind of protected in that philanthropy place, and I don't think that's really helpful for us or for others. And this wasn't really asked to address this specifically, but the name of this topic, like bringing it into our own lives, I decided to share a couple of other aspects of organizing that really actually are more personal. And of course, lo alecha hamlacha likmor. I mean, when you're aware of what we're doing to the planet and what the likelihood is of averting not disaster in the future, but more disaster in the future. We know this now. Lo alecha hamlacha likmor. It doesn't help the work if we have a wrong idea about what our responsibility is. It weighs on the heart. It depletes us. So how do we know and see clearly, not hide from it? How do we do that without our boat tipping over and taking on water? And for me, the answer is has to do with a little bit of humility. I'm not trying to change the world. I'm really not. I am changing the world in my Dalet Omas, in my 4 cubits. I'm aware. I'm hopeful. I'm active. That's how I'm changing the world. I can't really affect everything out there, but I can alchemize and stay aware and stay sweet and have a right idea of what I can do. In a way, I've kind of moved the goalpost, right? Because the sense of grief and outrage that I do feel at times, grief and outrage, I can feel that that's not fuel. And so I let the grief kind of go into fueling my sense of the preciousness, the sweetness of what it is that we harm and that we lose. And that helps, keeps my heart afloat. And in terms of the outrage, I process that into strength on a good day. So I don't know if my 10 minutes are up, but that's a lot of what I want to share.
You're told this by giving a little bit of overtime.
I'm already over time.
Wait, that wasn't a good ending.
Oh,
That was, I didn't have a power house.
Sorry,
No, I don't have a good ending. Never
It was
mind.
a good.
Just to let everybody know that I did mention in the introduction that part of our gathering this afternoon will also be a chance for people to break up into groups and to look at what they are doing to make the world a better place, or would like to do, or what they're not doing, and how they would like that to, or is already affecting something about their own communities, their own lives. So, you know, in this case, we have both an object about something that we're all concerned about, which is the global warming on the planet, and it really does require both acting on your own. A lot of people feel okay about changing just their goals, but what's really necessary is also some action as well. And then if you are involved in action about this, like Andrea is, then it also behooves us to try and do what we can in our own homes. So there's one question to you. Did you run the same test on your own house to find out if you were efficient at?
So because households make up a fairly sizable portion of how energy is used. The utility already had a funded program that I did take advantage of, that checked all the cracks in my windows and filled in some of that. I changed my windows. I shared that with my landlord. I said, I will pay for half and you pay for half. I was a tenant at the time, and I made that investment with him. Yeah, so the answer is yes. But the thing about, congregations use the same amount of energy nationally as vending machines. So the utility wasn't gonna come out and make a program for congregations to do that kind of self-study. That's why they turned to us for partnership, and that's why they let us serve in that capacity there. So that wasn't being served, and so, we made that program for them.
Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world?
Shalom, Chaverim.
Shalom, Swivl.
So I want to share with you something that I'm really passionate about, that I'm just lucky that I was redeployed here, and I'm certainly happy to talk with you afterwards about how you may be able to have it be some of the change in your world. According to the U.S. Census Department, from 2012 to 2050, the population of people over 65 will double from 43 to 83 million people. By 2025, it'll already be over 60 million people. Which will be almost 20% of the population by 2025 or 30. Not everyone's going to be able to live on their own or be taken care of at home or by their families. In Denver, here where I live and work, as in many places in our country, affordable housing is becoming harder and harder to find. As Shai spoke about earlier this week about the importance of how we treat people at home, not just how we do our social justice work out in the world, for me, how we treat and care for our elders is a very high measure of our true commitment to Tikkun Olam and the fifth commandment. So one response I've discovered is this place where I work, which is called Kavod Senior Life. And its byline is honor, community, and Jewish values. It is, roughly it's 3 connected high-rise apartment buildings in Cherry Creek, right in the center of Denver. 400 apartments, about 370 of them are independent living, and about 30 of them are assisted living. About 48% of the population is Jewish. About half the Jews are from the former Soviet Union or other such places, including some of the very last of our Holocaust survivors. So I came up with my own byline, my own elevator speech for what is Kavod Senior Life. Some of you have heard me say this. I describe Kavod Senior Life as a Jewishly hosted, multi-faith, affordable housing community for seniors. And I want to break that down a little bit to explain a little bit about what we're about. To explain Jewishly hosted, and I think this is almost, I was talking to Andrea at lunchtime, to me this is almost a messianic thing for us to be able to do. Jewish communities, Jewish organizations, as far as I've seen them, don't really do a great job of being Jewishly hosted while serving others. We tend to either just serve ourselves or we serve others while pretending not to be Jewish. So I very briefly, there's an organization in town called Cleo Parker Robinson Dance Company. It's an African-American dance company here in Denver. My family was very much a part of it for a number of years when my daughter was younger. She was in the holiday show every year. And what I learned from Cleo, she was very clear. This is an African-American community that is presenting the best, hopefully, of African-American community rituals and values. And everyone's welcome. And I thought, well, that's cool. And I get there and I discover well, I'm welcome, but they're not making it Jewish. Yes, I can, light the Chanukiah backstage, with the kids, and I can do some teaching with the dancers and so on, but they're not going to follow the Jewish calendar, which was a little tricky for me at first. But then but over time, what I discovered was the power of being hosted by somebody who is unambiguously being who they are and welcoming others. A side story I just realized, which I can some other time, is my experience at Canyon de Shade about 23 years ago with rabbis and native spiritual leaders, where again I learned about who I was by being hosted by others who were unabashedly who they were. So Kavod Senior Life is Jewishly hosted, is how I describe it. We are, it's a Jewish organization that is hosting from Jewish values, hosting everybody. I should have mentioned, it's a HUD facility also, so everyone who needs it has subsidized housing. We are multi-faith, meaning that Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus are all sitting at the same table. I don't have to work so hard to get them into the room. And they love it. The Jews love that it's not a Jewish ghetto and that it's Jewish. It's affordable housing. I brought both of my parents at different times. I brought to live at Kavod Senior Life. My father was living on a $1,300 a month Social Security check, and he was saving $300 a month. And that's after room and board. In fact, he was saving more than that because his total costs were like $750 a month. Anyway, community. I often hear the stories of seniors who are living at home alone, and it's them in a television set. We're building community. We have over 75 programs a month of all sorts of different kinds to enrich people's lives, both in our buildings and beyond. We serve 5 incredible dinners a week in our main dining hall for our independent living people. We are doing, it'll take too much time, but we do a lot of things to build community. It's very much part of what we're thinking about. We feel that, as part of our mission of helping seniors live meaningful lives, living meaningful lives in community is a big part of it. And I guess the last part is for seniors. A couple of things about what Kavod offers. As I said, it's affordable housing. All we really have to do, according to HUD, is provide affordable housing and make sure that it's safe enough to pass inspection once a year. We provide a restaurant-style sit-down meal Monday through Friday, plus a Sunday brunch, that the board throws in an extra $300,000 a year to pay for, so that the residents don't have to pay the full cost of the food. Like I said, over 70 enrichment programs. We got a huge grant. We blew off the penthouse off of one of the buildings and rebuilt it as a health and wellness center. So we now have in-house physical therapy, occupational therapy, acupuncture, podiatry, chiropractors, you name it, we've got it there. We're still in the process of building it. So our census, it's getting harder and harder to get in because somehow people are living healthier longer and not leaving. Imagine that. And we don't have to do any of this stuff, but we do. We have a robust staff of over 80 people, the majority of whom are not Jewish, but all of them are growing every day with intention from our board and our management team to live out the vision of a community based on honor community and Jewish values. And if you talk to our residents, you know who they get that the most from? Not from the management team or whatever. They get it from the maintenance department. They get it from the servers who are serving them dinner, from the cooks who are making the dinner. They're understanding, even if they're not Jewish for the most case, that's what we're doing. That's what it's about. So I had to do a training for our management team earlier last year on Jewish values. And I just want to say a little something about, I came up with 4 categories. I don't have to teach this stuff really to you guys, but I'll just mention that. So we talked about 2 values that are more about what we do more about how we do it than what we do. It's more about building relationships. And that was kavod, which we talked about as building dignity through our actions and how we do what we do. And again, as I said, even our maintenance crew understands that when you're knocking on when a resident comes and grabs you in the hallway, when you've got a list of 50 things to fix today in the apartments, and they want you to come, fix their sink, and it's, how do you talk to that person? How would you like to be treated if you were that person? We talked about chesed, giving of time and resource in a personal way, increasing relationships of understanding. That it's more about human connection than writing a check. And then we talked about two values that are more about what you do than how you do it, as long as it makes a real difference in people's lives. So we talked about the value of tzedakah, which we talked about as a required kind of tax that makes it possible to have a just society and that takes care of the needs of all. Which, by the way, when our board is trying to figure out the budget, that's a really important issue. It matters what's in the budget. It doesn't matter so much how nice the board members are, ultimately, even though they're all really nice. Because the question is this making a real difference in people's lives? Our activity department, now called Life Enrichment, 4 years ago started running cruises. We've taken 85-year-old residents who live on Social Security to Alaska, to the Caribbean, people who've never gotten to go on something like that. Talk about life enrichment. And lastly, we talked about Tikkun Olam, about being called by God to moral and ethical behavior, both as individuals and as society, being a holy nation, making a real difference in the world through justice and healing. So we were talking, last thing I'll say is we were talking earlier about how do you be Jewishly hosted when most of the staff is not Jewish? And some of our staff are devout Christians, religious Christians. And I'll teach these values, and they'll all say, well, I have those values are Christian values too. So it's this wonderful dynamic, and we're trying to, we're always working on it. How do we help everybody understand that these are Jewish values and they are universal values? They are Jewish values and Christian values. And as long as you can hold that, then go do it. Take all of you to serve our community and help build this holy community.
Amen.
Oh, and if you want, I do have some information sheets about us that are out there, and I have one copy of it. It's almost done. I've created a multi-faith book of prayers and meditations for vigils of remembrance, which is a little ritual that I do for all residents when they pass away, regardless of their faith tradition.
Stephen, what's your position there?
I'm sorry, I'm the chaplain, but I do more than that.
Yeah, but you just didn't say it.
Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world?
We're trading water for microphones. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was asked to talk about being at Standing Rock and how that impacted on me and how it's kind of carried into the future. I'm going to talk more about the lessons from Standing Rock because I don't know that I've yet been able to carry it as much as I would like into the future and into my own life. And I wanted to start with how called I felt. And I think that this is something as rabbis particularly we need to pay attention to. And maybe it was a part of that empathy that Shai is suspicious of, and I think that's okay. Because if we feel called, so what if it's $4 billion to a little girl in a well? I'm sure most of that money in the end went to help many other situations. So I believe in answering those calls as much as you can and taking the step that you can see. If you can see that you can take a step, take that step, and then the next step will reappear. And so, actually, the first is, I'm so glad you talked about Israel-Palestine. Thank you. So the first, another time I felt that call was during the Second Intifada, and I was part of a peace delegation to Israel and Palestine. And I think that it's very important that we don't let fear stop us, but we acknowledge that sometimes these things can be very frightening. And as you do these steps, you can see the fear changes to something else. So it often changes to, at least for me, to a kind of feeling of determination. Like, oh, yes, I am going to do this. And once I make up my mind I'm going to do it, then I start doing it. So the first clergy call to Standing Rock was in November, and I could not go, but I knew some rabbinic students particularly who were going to be there. And I decided to make a banner. And I had already kind of, from the videos and the communication, picked out that putting a lot of kavanah into the material expressions was important. So I used fabric from my sukkah and decoration that had like fall, it was in the fall, as the border. And as I sewed, I prayed and I recited psalms, and I put in a lot of prayers for protection and for success. And then I packed up, and then I put out a call to you all, to Olam, and to the Rabbinic Association in DC, because my banner said, Rabbis and Friends Stand with Standing Rock. And a lot of people said yes, put my name on it, so it had about 40 other names, and I put friends because I knew my class, my students in my social action, the spiritual practice would want to participate, and the ministers that I work with in my interfaith group would want to participate. And so I packed it up and sent it FedEx to the clergy who had made that first call for clergy, and heard back later that it did arrive, and that someone took it to the sacred fire that was burning all the time at the Oshati Sakawan camp, and said, who's here of the Hebrew faith? And Miriam Grossman, who some of us know, said, me! And they carried that while they protested at the camp, and also they took it while they protested at the governor's office. And this is a direct quote, it was last seen in the hands of a Jew from Chicago. So, yeah. If anyone lives in Chicago, you can ask about it. Oh yeah, Michael.
Who is it?
I don't know. It's up to you to find out. So then a second call came for clergy. Actually, this was from one of the native chiefs, Chief Looking Horse. The first call was from a minister working on the reservation saying, come, if you're thinking about coming, come now. I couldn't. But that time I could, the December 3rd call, December 4th. And I think there's lessons there already. So if we're going to be allies, it's like Shema, listen. And when you're called, come. Don't necessarily assume to come before that. And also, like, wait to be invited. Also, they had done a lot of work to create a place that was embodying the Lakota values, and you could find these online. You know, when I connected to the clergy, they sent lots of links to resources, and these were their values. And I think that's another way we be the change we want to see in the world, as we we think about what our values are, like what you did, you know, and then we try to live them. So these were the values that they listed: prayer, respect, compassion, honesty, generosity, humility, and wisdom. And they said, and I really tried to embody this, to be in a constant state of prayer and ceremony, so that when you're there, everything you're doing is coming out of a prayerful space. And I think this is the thing I most want to carry in to my work, is to do whatever, when I'm at a protest, when I'm advocacy work, to be in a actually prayerful space. And that, it was interesting the way that manifested in the camp. For instance, the sacred fire was kept burning all times. So that's just like our Ner Tamid. You know, it was really interesting to see how the symbolic language of religions, and not only the values, are so similar often. And then generosity, there were 8 communal kitchens going where anyone could eat for free who was living there. But those of us that were only there for a few days were asked to give more than we took. And there were people coming and just sharing food all the time, you know, just all kinds of different food. And people, if they didn't need, they didn't take. It was lived in a much bigger way, I think, than we live generosity in our communities. And that was also true of Palestinians. That it was something I brought home from that, was to open my house. If anyone needs to stay in my house, they are always welcome. To just make that as a stand. And I feel like we could do a little better there, frankly. And then respect for elders was amazing, amazing, amazing. Like you've probably all heard, oh, Native Americans, they respect their elders. But what did it look like? What it looked like was, the minute I got out of the car and we went, I'll back up 1 minute. I was accompanied by a very young woman who was looking to see if any Jews were going to be there, and connected through a rabbi I'd worked with. So when you take that step, know that help will come. I would have done it alone, but it was amazingly helpful to have a young woman with me. And I think it would have been very hard for her to be alone in that space also. So the fact that we found each other, I feel was like a little bit of that shafa, that divine intervention, that when you take a step, you will in fact be supported in some unexpected ways. So we went the day before the clergy action to the grocery store there and bought food there. Like, you could buy it really cheap there too, like a bag of potatoes like this. I'm not exaggerating, for $3.49. So from the minute I stepped out of the car and people saw my white hair, they ran to help. Let us carry your stuff. And the first day we were there, it was somewhat warm in the 30s, and the snow was thawing. It was very muddy. The main road was like a river of mud. And every time I went to walk, someone was there to hold my hand. I mean, unbelievable. And the only other experience I've had of that is when my family returned from living in Israel on a kibbutz, and my son was like 2.5. Someone remarked that when he went to go down steps, he would just put out his hand. So he's 43 now. So it took 40 years for me to see that experience of being that attentive to people, that you can just put out a hand and someone's there. This is a way of embodying generosity and compassion that was living those values. And I want to say humility was thankfully evident in the interfaith service the next day. All the allies actually did speak briefly. And yeah, I mean, even Cornel West, you know, who can be pretty wordy, said he was very concise and spoke truth, and it was very beautiful.
And Native Americans, some of the elders went on, one talked for an hour more than the schedule. And we were there for this purpose. We were there to hold the space, to bear witness, to listen, and nobody was like, okay, your time's up. Which I have to say I've done to some of our elders. I feel really bad about that. But you know, when you're in a space where they tell you you have to be out by 10 and the maintenance people will be harmed if you go over, then it gets very tricky. But when you're all in a space where there is no hurry, then you can do that. And I think wisdom was embodied when the Chief Looking Horse asked us not to march to the bridge and protest. And we were prepared to do that. But he's like, no, I had, you know, whatever, a vision. I don't want you to do that. I want you to encircle the camp and pray. And so the clergy did that, like taking the lead from the people you're there to support seems pretty important. And actually, I found a place in the snow and I chanted Ozil Zimrat that we started with for about 3 hours. And I was blessed to be there at a moment in time that I will never forget, which is we heard that the Army Corps of Engineers was going to deny the easement at that moment. You know, at that moment we had a momentary victory, and we knew this isn't this is a battle, it's not the war, they're not going away. Trump could be elected, who knows, whatever, but, and I think this is really important, we allowed ourselves that moment of joy, and of tears, and of feeling gratitude. And I think that's really important, that you celebrate the victories, even if you know that they may not be lasting. But I have frankly, and I've been an activist since high school, which is quite a while ago, I've never been at a protest where you heard a win right there. It was unbelievable, it was amazing and very moving. So the things I'm taking into the future are that sense of how to create that really prayerful space. And I've been working a little with Arthur Waskow, but I'm taking it back because it was my idea. I'm taking it back, an idea to try to reach Scott Pruitt through a faith message and making connections with Christians and with Baptists who are his own denomination, and hopefully we will prayerfully be delivering, and was that my time? Prayerfully delivering Bibles with our own heartfelt messages as faith people about caring for the earth. And so that's what I learned. Thank you.
Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world?
So I was trying to figure out how to do something in regard to Kiowa here, and I decided to mark my congregation in the Oakland, Berkeley, Piedmont area. And I decided to look at just one small particular thing, which is could characterize our congregation. And I decided to focus on looking at a process that we went through in order to develop a value statement on Israel-Palestine. And the thing is that in the way that what we did reflects something that we wanted to change in the world, is that we saw that Palestinians were very disenfranchised, that the folks in the West Bank could not vote for their own government, they couldn't pass their own laws, they were completely subject to whatever the Israeli authorities did. So if we were going to pass a value statement, how do we do it without disenfranchising anybody in our own community? So I'm going to read you a little bit from this excerpt from our statement about why was the value statement developed, or how was it developed. So let me just read a little bit of this. In 1985, Keela took a survey over wording of a statement. This is 85, so it's 33 years ago. Took a survey over wording of a statement that called for negotiations between the Israeli government and the Palestine Liberation Organization toward the establishment of a Palestinian state in the occupied territories. This was highly controversial in its time, 8 years before the Oslo Accords. It passed almost unanimously. We were out of step with the established leadership in the Jewish community. In the wake of a Kol Nidre sermon by me in 2002, looking at alternative narratives about Israel and Palestine, we engaged in a 7-month survey as a 7-month study as a congregation that eventually resulted in our first Brit Shalom, Covenant of Peace, inspired by Martin Buber's I Thou philosophy, calling for nonviolence, reconciliation, and the need to recognize the history and human needs of all who live in Israel-Palestine as the parties moved to build a new reality that would resolve the conflict. These two resolutions impliedly rejected the occupation of the territories, but did not do so explicitly, largely because the expectation was that any true resolution would dissolve the reality of the occupation. However, since the time of Brit Shalom, during the years of the Netanyahu governments, as settlements in the West Bank increased in size and expanded further into the territory, the prospects for a reconciliation and resolution have become more remote, and the military control over the lives of Palestinians under occupation has become increasingly severe. I got to see that, by the way, this spring while I was in the West Bank with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. Back to the statement here. Many of us have become alarmed at the very real prospect of a permanent occupation of the West Bank and the blockade of Gaza. Our Middle East Peace Committee held a series of educationals, panels, movies, lectures, active listening gatherings, compassionate listening gatherings about the occupation. Our survey of the congregation showed that there was a diversity about what strategies or tactics we as individuals or as a synagogue should do in response to or in opposition to the occupation. However, we saw in the responses and comments that there were common themes and common values shared by people in Kiev, both those, for example, who supported boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or those who opposed BDS. When people would say, I'm opposed to it, I'm in favor of it, and they could write a comment, and the comments were remarkably the same whether they opposed it or they supported it. It was like, I support BDS because it's the best way to pressure the Israeli government and the occupation. I don't support BDS because I think it's a misplaced strategy that will backfire and will not be able to push the Israeli government to end the occupation. Okay, so an example of that. Similar responses on those who supported a two-state solution and those who supported a one-state solution. We decided to develop a congregational statement of values rather than a platform describing tactics and descriptions of any ultimate resolution to the conflictual reality of Israel-Palestine. Over 90% of our respondents favored or strongly favored this wording as reflecting their values. But congregants are not uniform in their feelings, and we recognize that too. But we hope that this statement is a basis for discussion across the Jewish world and beyond, and that it reassures the large number of Jews who feel similarly, and to let them know that they are not alone. So that is actually longer than the statement itself. So let me review the statement of values. Now, I recognize I'm not advocating that everybody here should get a statement like this out in their congregation. But at least I want to bend the stick so that you can begin to see what could be possible at the edges, and also to think about how you combine process with the product. So the statement begins with 3 quotes. That which is hateful to you, do not do to another. Hillel, Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 31a. You shall not oppress the stranger, and you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim. Exodus 23:9. Zion shall be redeemed by justice. Isaiah 1:27. From its inception, and in our statements and resolutions over the years, Gila Community Synagogue has affirmed the inherent dignity of all people. We affirm that equal respect must be accorded to Jews and to Palestinians, whether they have Israeli citizenship or not, and to all others who currently live in areas controlled by the Israeli government or its military. And we must acknowledge that everyone in Israel-Palestine has deep fears for their security, and that they all desire a future for their children in which they live with peace and justice. Then we have 7 small sections. In regard to Zionism, in Kehillah, we recognize the historical connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, and we recognize the love for that land as expressed in Jewish biblical, liturgical, legal, and literary texts. We distinguish between this historical attachment and modern political Zionism. Our individual members have a variety of relationships to Zionism, but as a congregation, we do not fuse the practice of our spirituality and morality with any form of political nationalism. So we have Zionists, post-Zionists, non-Zionists, anti-Zionists, all in the same congregation. The effort is, how can we actually be present at each other's Shiva gatherings, right? So, and so one thing is that we don't have an Israeli flag in our sanctuary. We don't have an American flag in our sanctuary either. So we're keeping nationalism out of the sanctuary. On oppression and injustice, we recognize that the establishment of the State of Israel was an outcome of oppression experienced by the Jewish people over many centuries, most notably the Shoah, the Nazi Holocaust. And we must also acknowledge that the creation of a Jewish state in historic Palestine and the occupation or control over the West Bank and Gaza Strip has resulted in tragic injustices experienced by the Palestinian people. Next section, peace and justice, the occupation, and human rights. We seek a future that includes security and full civil and human rights for all who dwell on the land, Jews and non-Jews alike. We do not accept the oppression of non-Jews, Palestinians and others, nor the denial of equal treatment in the territories and within Israel. As a congregation, we believe that Israel's maintaining of the occupation, the extensive blockade of Gaza, and the creation and continued construction of Jewish-only settlements in the West Bank defeat the interests of peace and justice. Next section, rejecting exclusivity. We affirm the unique role that the land between the Jordan River and the sea has played in Jewish history and in the aspirations of many Jews for a time or a place of safety, justice, and peace. Nevertheless, we do not accept the exclusive Jewish entitlement to the land, nor to the city of Jerusalem. We recognize that the land and the city are sacred to many faiths and are a home to a variety of peoples, ethnicities, and cultures. How we resolve that that non-exclusivity, remain silent about that. Religious freedom. We affirm the human right to freedom of religious conscience, belief, and practice where it does not infringe on the human rights of others. We affirm this right in our own country and everywhere. Religious freedom must be available in Israel-Palestine for Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, atheists, and all others with a full separation of religious and state authority. Last section, open discussion, open ears. We believe that open dialogue is a necessary activity within our synagogue, in the Jewish community, and in society at large. In regard to discussions about Israel-Palestine, we seek to speak compassionately and to listen compassionately to many ideas about resolving the violent and tragic situation that has emerged and persists in Israel-Palestine. The cohesiveness of our community is not dependent upon the unanimity on these issues, but rather it depends on a willingness to listen and to speak with compassion and with respect for the dignity of the other. And so that was the value statement that we put together. It went through many iterations, and what we did was, after we got the survey done, and when we did the survey, it was a survey of several, probably about 20 questions, and people were allowed to write, not just, check off, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but they actually were able to write things, which was a problem for me because we had 215 responses. And we have a congregation of 400 we had 400 households at that time. And that meant I was basically reading a volume in order to be able to get a sense. And that's where I could feel the values begin to emerge. So what we did was wrote a first draft that we then had people come to between Yom Kippur morning service and Yom Kippur afternoon service. If they want to, they could come. That was the first time it was distributed around, and people spoke out their souls. And there was a lot of good criticism of it. Places where the language was, people felt excluded by certain parts of the language that were being used. Many people in this room may feel excluded by the language that we have here, but in the congregation, we worked hard to keep on hearing and redrafting, and we have more meetings and have another redrafting, another meeting, and finally we came up with this draft, and that was the survey that we sent out to the community as a whole, and they basically had to say only one question, to what degree do you favor this statement, and went from strongly disagree to strongly agree, 5 selections, 90% chose 5, strongly agree, another 5% chose was it very somewhat it was agreed to a large extent, something like that. And then there were like 2 responses that said somewhat disagree, and 1 response that said largely disagree. So and it was interesting because people who I know who are very much in disagreement about Israel-Palestine on all sorts of different issues were actually in agreement about the statement, that they thought it reflected them. So the question was, how can we enfranchise everybody and come up with a statement that really expressed our values? And we've used this now as an organizing principle. So what we're going to do, actually, why don't we take one more refrain, and I'll explain our next thing that we'll be doing during the next 20 minutes to 30 minutes.
Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change? Won't you be the change you want to see in the world?
So I actually have a bit of a dilemma, which is how do we live our values right here in this moment? So one thing that we had thought to do is have people break up into groups of like 3 to 4 people, and we have little slips of paper over there near the flowers that have 2 questions on them. We thought it might be interesting for people to speak and hear each other in a group of 3 or 4, and do that for about 20 minutes so people have a chance to talk out what particular issues are of importance to them.